former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, the headlines are screaming that a civil war broke out on the stage in Detroit, where a gaggle of Democratic presidential wannabes congregated on Tuesday and Wednesday nights to signal their virtue, outbid each other on social justice and free stuff, and of course brag on their relative degrees of revulsion to President Trump. But more than anything, they argued amongst themselves about whether their party should be defined by conventional liberalism or outright socialism. But hold on just a minute. I thought the civil war arising in the Democratic Party was between the old guard radicals of Pelosi and the progressive vanguard fronted by AOC plus 3. But I guess that was last week's fracture. What we're now witnessing after 4 hours of raucous debate between high-profile hardline leftists and suddenly reasonable-sounding liberals is a party even more fractured than the one drawing the wrong kind of headlines about internal power struggles on Capitol Hill these days. And that makes for a triangular war. But more on that in a bit. First, to the second round of debates, and most of the incoming was directed at the frontrunner Joe Biden, who stubbornly holds to a double-digit lead despite a weak performance in the first debate. Even though he was the vice president for the nation's first black president, Biden was again forced to defend his record on race and his sponsorship of the infamous crime bill 25 years ago amid the taunts of Cory Booker, who concluded with a kind of line that long shots like him were trying desperately to go viral.
Mr. Vice President has said that since the 1970s, every major crime bill, major and minor, has had his name on it. And sir, those are your words, not mine. There are people right now in prison for life for drug offenses because you stood up and used that tough on crime, phony rhetoric that got a lot of people elected, but destroyed communities like mine. The house was set on fire, and you claimed responsibility for those laws. And you can't just now come out with a plan to put out that fire.
In 2007, you became mayor. You had a police department you went out and you hired Rudy Giuliani's guy. You engaged in stop and frisk. 3 times as many African-American kids were caught in that chain. The Justice Department came after you.
And if you want to compare records, and frankly, I'm shocked that you do, there's a saying in my community, you're dipping into the Kool-Aid and you don't even know the flavor. You need to...
Okay, so that line did go viral. Biden was attacked on race there, but also on the gender issue by one-percenter Kirsten Gillibrand, who attacked Biden even though he's been a pro-choice liberal for his entire career. But Biden was having none of it from the opportunistic senator from New York.
I came up with the It's On Us proposal to see to it that women were treated more decently on college campuses. You came to Syracuse University with me and said it was wonderful. I'm passionate about the concern, making sure women are treated equally. I don't know what's happened except that you're now running for president.
So I understand.
So Biden had a few good retorts, but he seemed neither to strengthen nor weaken his position as the unquestioned frontrunner. But the woman who took on Biden in the first debate was, by all accounts, not so good this time. Kamala Harris, who actually got a very small bump in the end from her forceful performance in the first debate, was targeted this time, particularly by Tulsi Gabbard on her record as Attorney General in California, while Bernie Sanders, oldest of the 20 candidates in the debates, was more effective with his angry socialist diatribes against corporations this time. John Delaney, who made good use of his moments in the sun and said he was the only one on stage with experience in the healthcare industry, was attacked by Bernie for daring to make a profit on healthcare and rejecting Bernie's Medicare for All government takeover.
Under Medicare for All, the hospitals will save substantial sums of money because they're not going to be spending a fortune doing billing and the other bureaucratic things that they have to do today.
I've done
Second
the math,
of all,
it doesn't add up.
maybe you did that and made money off of health care, but our job is to run a nonprofit health care system.
Well, didn't that just perfectly exemplify the Democrats' tirades against essentially anyone with money, corporations, drug companies, insurance companies? And they shot down the cooler heads trying to prevail on the radical frontrunners not to take the party off a leftward cliff, like when Bernie shot down long-shot moderate Tim Ryan on Medicare for All, saying, just go ahead and look past the tax increases on the middle class needed to fund it.
They will be better because Medicare for All is comprehensive. It covers all health care needs for senior citizens. It will finally include dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses.
But you don't know.
Second of all,
you don't know that,
second
Bernie.
of all,
We'll come to you in a second,
I do know, and I wrote the damn bill.
But Bernie wasn't the only top-tier candidate defending socialist policies against the moderates. Listen to how Pocahontas Elizabeth Warren shot down John Delaney when he told the truth about the socialist agenda of so many of the candidates.
I think Democrats win when we run on real solutions, not impossible promises. When we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics.
You know, I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for.
So if you don't agree with Pocahontas' radical ideas, you shouldn't even run for president. Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper put it all in perspective, talking about the plan of all the frontrunners, except Biden, to confiscate people's private health insurance in favor of a government-run program.
This notion that you're going to take private insurance away from 180 million Americans, who many of them don't want to give it. Many of them do want to get rid of it, but some don't. That is a disaster at the ballot box. You might as well FedEx the election to Donald Trump.
But the way moderates like Hickenlooper and Delaney were repeatedly shot down by the top-tier socialists was to label them as essentially closet Republicans, turncoats, not real Democrats, using GOP talking points.
We are the Democrats. We are not about trying to take away health care from anyone. That's what the Republicans are trying to do. And we should stop using Republican talking points.
And Jake, your question is a Republican talking point. The healthcare industry will be advertising tonight with that talking point.
We cannot keep with the Republican talking points on this.
This has nothing to do with Republican talking points.
It's not a Republican talking point.
What you want to do instead is find the Republican talking point of a made-up piece of some other part.
Open borders is a right-wing talking point.
You said it's a right-wing Republican talking point, but it's also Jay Johnson's talking point. He said it was essentially open borders.
I respect Secretary Johnson, and it's unfortunate that he's basically adopting that right-wing talking point.
Jay Johnson was Obama's Homeland Security Director, but apparently he's in the grips of the right wing as well. So you can call someone a communist in the Democratic Party and it goes right off their backs, but call them a Republican and man, that is cold. I will say this, if the moderates or traditional liberals were ever to arise in this contest, now's the time. We shall see whether the polling numbers for Delaney and Ryan and Hickenlooper and Steve Bullock get any kind of bump or all stay where they are at 1% or below. We'll offer up a sampling of media reaction to the debates during our Say What segment a bit later on, but how many times and in how many ways did these debating Democrats invoke racism? We'll tell you and discuss how conservatives should best respond when we return.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, the word racist or racism was used 936 times in the second round of Democratic presidential debates this week. Okay, it only seemed like that many times. So what's a conservative or libertarian or anyone else than a leftist to do when such a vile accusation is made? I mean, this is something that used to be considered a blood libel to call someone a racist. Now it's an everyday occurrence. Well, LibertyNation.com chief political correspondent Graham Noble has written about this, and he joins us now. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Tim.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, so I appreciate you joining us. I thought what was notable in these debates, which nobody paid much attention to, was the hapless co-moderator Don Lemon employing the adjective racist to Trump's recent tweet about Baltimore as fact, not opinion. He didn't say, some people are saying that, but he treated it as it was racist, period. Now, you wrote about this type of race baiting that we saw in the debate and that we saw from Don Lemon in an article on Liberty Nation entitled "Conservatives Stop Running from Race Baiters." And you describe people who recoil when being accused of racism as yellow bellies. So how then should conservatives most constructively respond to the constant taunts about being racists?
Well, I think, of course, one thing they could say is, well, if I am, then what are you? But that doesn't quite have the effect.
I know you, like the schoolyard taunt, I know you are, but what am I? Yes.
Exactly, yeah. But I think really what they should do is first of all, they absolutely need to stop this reflexively going on the defensive whenever anyone accuses them of racism, because it's just nonsense, and anyone with any sense realizes that these labels, these insults such as racist, homophobe, xenophobe, Islamophobe, you name it, they are all used purely to silence those people who do not agree with the progressive so-called social justice agenda. And I really think that what Republicans and conservatives should do when they are faced with these kind of labels, particularly the racism label, is simply turn around and say, look, what exactly have Democrats ever done to improve the lives of African Americans, particularly those in these inner city, horrible, crime-ridden districts? What have Democrats actually done, considering that they have run many of these districts for 40, 50, 60 years, virtually one-party rule over these kind of areas and certain cities and certain districts? What have they actually ever done to improve the lives of these people? Because, there's a lot of high-minded talk about institutional racism and systematic racism, and there's a lot of rhetoric, but there's no actual actions to back it up. The Democrats are simply unable to say, well, we've improved the lives of African Americans, by doing X, Y, and Z, because they have not.
Yes, it is notable, Graham, that in all the talk about Trump being a racist because of his tweet about Baltimore and, singling out people of color like Elijah Cummings and the infestation of his districts and everything, I mean, they haven't even debated the facts of what Trump said, have they?
No, and indeed, and that's part of the big problem here, is that Democrats are completely unwilling to acknowledge the terrible conditions in many inner city neighborhoods and districts in this country, and that in itself, to me, is concerning. It's troubling that they won't, that they'll kill the messenger, but they're not interested in hearing the message or addressing it.
Now, has the word racist been used so often by the left? I mean, it was used dozens of times in these debates. Has it been used so often that it's lost its meaning?
Yeah, I really think it has. I mean, it's actually appalling that they use this word so often, because it's, there's that kind of old saying, when, if everybody's a racist, then nobody's a racist.
Right.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And, racism does exist. I would certainly suggest that, there are people in this country not just this country, but across the world. There are people of all colors and ethnicities who are racist. But there's certainly no denying that there are white people in the Western world who are racist, flat out. You can't hide from that. But this idea of basically labeling everybody a racist purely because they point out certain real world problems is just ridiculous.
Now, Joe Biden continues to hold a healthy double-digit lead in the Democrats' presidential race, despite, being Joe Biden. He's still leading. Do you think anyone knocked him down a peg in the second round of debates this week?
I really believe that he took quite a beating in that debate from several people. I mean, I think we all anticipated that Senator Kamala Harris would go after him because obviously she is kind of up there close to the top, 3 or 4 front runners. Also, Senator Booker went after him. Senator Gillibrand went after him. He really was a man, as I said in my article, he walked onto that stage with a target on his back. And I really think I've noticed that in the media, a lot of left-wing political pundits have tried to suggest that actually he did pretty well in that debate. I don't really think so. I don't think he did well at all. I don't think he effectively defended himself. He was on the defensive the whole time. And I personally believe that his poll numbers are going to decline over the next, couple of weeks as a result of that poor debate performance.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think Biden's lead, which continues to be in double digits, I mean, he's up by about 15 points on average in the respectable polls, do you think that lead is mostly a function of A, his own merits, B, his own relative moderation, C, a pure name recognition, or D, the weakness of the rest of the field?
I think it's partly a product of all of those factors except A, his own merits. Joe Biden is the only guy in this race so far who combines a good chance of becoming the nominee with a relatively moderate platform.
I can't disagree with that. Graham, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Tim. Thank you.
Graham Noble, chief political correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back with our signature segment, Say What?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Joe Biden was under the Klieg lights during the Democratic debates, and while he stumbled a few times, as usual, he did little to hurt or help himself. But David Axelrod, chief strategist in Barack Obama's 2 successful presidential campaign, said there's good news and the same bad news for Biden.
I think the good news for Joe Biden is this was maybe the best he could do. And the bad news is this may be the best he could do. He had moments in which he was uncertain, where he was on the defensive. Tonight he had to be a gut fighter, and I think he paid some price for that.
Meanwhile, over on MSNBC, home of the left, analyst Rick Tyler observed that these presidential candidates seem to take on their own former president more than President Trump.
The most disturbing thing is they went after President Barack Obama more so than they did the President of the United States, and it seemed as though a lot of Democrats were very upset about that. Biden, of course, was vice president under Barack Obama. It does use Barack Obama's name quite a bit. What I don't understand what Biden didn't answer is although Barack Obama did have what they say is a record number of deportations, they changed the way they counted them. They turned turnarounds into deportations. That is, people who were caught at the border and immediately turned around. That was never counted as a deportation, and that probably accounts for the high numbers. And I don't know why he didn't bring that to the audience's attention.
And that's a very good point. Obama's deportation numbers were definitely inflated. But life goes on for the Democrats after the first two rounds of debates, as does the question of which of these candidates could actually beat Donald Trump. Now, the one guy who nailed Trump's impending victory in 2016 as soundly as anyone in the country was the leftist filmmaker Michael Moore. And before you hear what he thinks the Democrats need to do to win this time, listen to what he said just before the 2016 vote and after the shocking victory of Brexit in England.
It's going to be the Brexit strategy. The middle of England is Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And Mitt Romney lost by 64 electoral votes. The total electoral votes of those four states in the Rust Belt, 64. Yeah. All he has to do is win those four states. And I'm telling you, I was there during the Michigan primary, and he went there in front of the Ford, and he said, I'm telling you right now, they moved this factory to Mexico. I'm putting the tariff on the cars, and that's it. And it was music to people's ears, and more people in Michigan, in the Michigan primary, voted Republican than Democrat in the primary this year. That should be disturbing to everybody.
Okay, so he got it exactly right. Trump won all of those states he mentioned in the Midwest. But this time, Michael Moore says if the Democrats want to win, there's only one candidate who can pull it off.
It's not enough just to beat Trump. The only way to remove Trump is to crush Trump. And that's the question that has to be asked. Who can crush Trump? Who's the street fighter? If the election were held today, there is one person that would crush Trump. And she hasn't announced yet. And her last name rhymes with Obama. In fact, it is Obama. Michelle Obama.
Well, there's still time before the election, 16 months to be precise. But you've got to say, just the fact that a leftist like Michael Moore is panicked enough to demand a candidate that will never run tells you what Democrats really think about their chances of unseating President Trump. And I can tell you this, if they keep trying to deny and talk down our roaring economy and record low unemployment, they're not going to win. But when this week's debates were over, Joe Biden went back on the stump and did exactly that.
The world has changed. President Trump has turned it upside down internationally. He has turned it upside down economically. We faced a different problem 10 years ago when the economy collapsed because of Republican policies. Now we face a problem that the economy as well as the soul of this country is collapsing because of this presidency.
Mm-hmm. High economic growth, record low unemployment for blacks and Hispanics and women. But Joe Biden says the economy is collapsing. And you wonder why people have trouble taking Joe Biden seriously.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And we welcome you now to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitled Talkin' Liberty. It's self-explanatory, as we are joined by our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
In the mix. I am very well, thank you, Tim.
In the mix. Now, 5 Columbus, Ohio, police officers face discipline for the arrest of, here she goes again, Stormy Daniels in a strip club raid. She's back in the news, just where she wants to be, Scott.
Back in the news with a dollar sign, Tim. She's going to get paid and paid well for this illegal arrest that the Columbus Police Department issued. You know, she was arrested basically because they were Trump supporters and they didn't like her, saying that she had relations with the president and that he lied about it. And so they arrested her. They used the power of their office and their badges to do so, and now the tax-paying citizens of Columbus are going to take it on the chin. Fortunately, though, we actually see some discipline here. There are ranging from an actual sort of like a nasty letter to the file kind of discipline straight through to actual dismissal. And it includes not only just sort of the line officers, but a commander, a lieutenant, and a sergeant, as well as the 2 arresting officers who did the dirt here against Stormy Daniels. Now, you'll recall, Tim, I saw Stormy Daniels perform, or I was at
in
the
a
performance.
professional capacity.
Well, you can't say that too.
Yes.
I called ahead of time to get that billed, and I was denied permission to have that billed as a professional. I was there in a personal capacity that my profession has benefited from. I must say.
You can take it up with a company CPA. I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
But the police stormed that event. That was in Pittsburgh. Now, they didn't make an arrest in that event, but I can tell you, as a patron at that strip club, it was very intimidating when the police raided the event, and it's very likely they did so in Pittsburgh for the same reason they did so in Columbus. Political animus, and it's a total violation of free speech, and it's a darn shame for the taxpaying citizens of Columbus, but I think it's a good move for liberty that these police officers are being brought to justice for their infringement.
Well, it seems to me that, no matter your political bent, if you take on the President of the United States, you're going to pay a price for it, because there's always going to be people that support him.
Well, in this case, yeah, but the price shouldn't be paid illegally at the hands of
course
brutality
not.
by
It's just
municipal PD.
It's
right?
just an empirical
Okay.
observation. More.
All right.
It's not an assent.
Okay, excuse me. All right.
To what they did, lest you think otherwise.
Well, no, it is, and nobody's learning that lesson more than Stormy Daniels, probably, to the positive and the negative.
Okay, Scott, the FCC has ordered cities and towns to stop regulating cable broadband. Why would that be?
Well, because everybody wants a little piece of that pie, and the mayors of these towns, they say, oh, you want to come in and sell broadband to our town? Well, what are you going to do for us, right? Meanwhile, the citizens are screwed for lack of competition, and the payoffs get made to City Hall, whether it's their I'm not suggesting necessarily that it's an actual payoff in terms of cash in an envelope, but maybe it's they have to dedicate some public access channel or give free cable to a school or old age home that the politician can then go say, look what I did for the community. But in any case, it's not fair dealing and it's not fair competition. And the FCC is trying to break down those barriers to competition by every little, two-bit king who decides what can go on in terms of the sale of these telecommunication services in their town.
So who should properly regulate cable broadband?
The market, Tim, is who should properly regulate cable broadband.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
In lieu of a total market solution, though, we should have the most sort of freedom possible in the marketplace, which would argue, I think, for federalization, as long as that regulation was just simply about sort of a truth in advertising and a standardization of service. So if you, for instance, I think there's plenty of room in the marketplace if you want to say, this is what the word 5G means, and if you say we offer 5G, then this is the standard. That's a fair place for the government to enter the marketplace to avoid confusion and sort of, just fair dealing. But this kind of, if you want to sell Wi-Fi to my community, you've got to put money in my pocket, or in the politician's word, the pocket of my favorite program, that seems inappropriate.
Hardly a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
Been going on our whole lives. Now let's move closer to home to here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Oh, yes.
Where a court has ruled that a driver lying to a cop is not obstruction.
The hero in this case is Judge Robert J. Humphreys, Tim, and he articulates for the Northampton County Police in Virginia. And I think I picked the story not because I think that this one ruling is instrumental or going to go nationwide, but I think it's indicative of a common problem, which is that police officers try to criminalize behavior that they dislike and are frustrated with. In this case, it happens to them probably on a daily basis, is that somebody lies to them. And we can all understand how that's really frustrating, but it's not a crime to lie to the police unless that lie meets very specific factual.
And like what?
So, for instance, if the guy, if it was your kid who robbed the bank and he went that way, okay, and I come out of the bank with my cop uniform on, I say, did you see anybody? And you say, yeah, and he ran that way, okay, and then the bank robber got away. Well, you have now frustrated the investigation through your active lies to me to the point where you've really obstructed justice. So in that instance, that's a prosecutable lie. That's not what happened here. What happened here was this guy's kid took a car that he shouldn't have and was drunk and driving and beat up the car, basically. And it was a single car accident. No one outside the family was affected. But the police officer wanted to make an arrest, and the father didn't want his son to go to prison for DUI, so he lied about where he was. It didn't affect the investigation one way or the other, and the court said just because this person lied to you, and maybe you had to spend a few minutes dealing with that lie, that does not meet the burden of criminal obstruction of justice because, Tim, it's a First Amendment issue. Just like, you can issue an opinion that somebody doesn't like, you can also lie.
The law is the law.
That shirt looks great on you, Tim. I want to say that right now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And your basket of deplorables shirt is equally attractive. For those of you watching
there you
this
go.
section of the program.
My apologies for that.
We try not to make a big deal about the fact that we're now offering a video feed of the radio show with all our embarrassing blips
to
that
those
occur
who are
as to see the
gluttons for punishment, Tim, with
sausage is being made.
nothing better to look at, the imprisoned and hospitalized.
I should point out to the listeners, though, that if they do go
Right.
to LibertyNation.com, you can both see and hear the radio show and the podcast. But we'll promote that at the end. Meanwhile, a big issue, Scott, is the ability of citizens and organizations to sue gun manufacturers. And Remington, the maker of the gun used in the Sandy Hook massacre, has asked the Supreme Court to block a lawsuit.
Well, the Connecticut Supreme Court recently ruled that they would be held liable for lawsuit because they made the gun. Now, we have this legislation called the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, and that's a federal law designed to shield gun makers because what would happen if it didn't exist, likely, is that enough random juries feeling sympathy for the victims of homicides are basically convinced that gun makers somehow bear the burden of this criminal intervention, which is just anathema to Second Amendment, upholding the Second Amendment. We're not going to have any gun makers. If any time a gun is used criminally, you can just go after the gun maker for all they're worth. And that's what the law was designed to protect. It's a straight kind of red state versus blue state situation. The people who want to ban guns are for removing this type of protection, and the people who recognize that or say they recognize that guns are vital and protected know that they have to keep this kind of legislation in place, or else there will be no guns to keep and bear. So whether the Supreme Court takes it up, Tim, we're going to have to see if the votes are there. I predict they will be, given Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. They seem to be, at least Gorsuch seems to be a likely, pro-gun vote. And we'll see what Kavanaugh does if he picks up the mantle that Scalia left behind.
Well, we got one more story to cover before we depart, and that is Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri.
Oh, my God, this guy. Unbelievable.
Well,
just unbelievable.
He's introduced a law to criminalize infinite scrolling, auto-playing video on websites and other social media.
He has taken a look at the ills of social media, Tim, and he has said that if you want to put up a website, and that website has, for instance, auto-playing videos, that what's appropriate is for him to place a gun to the head of all Americans and demand they pony up money for police officers to come and put you in chains and lock you in a cage for some years, because that's the crime that he wants to enact into federal law, the federal crime of having a website that has autoplay videos because of the ills of social media. That's Republican. Remember, these Republicans, they're all about I don't know what, but I thought this guy was a progressive socialist when I first read this legislation. But
he's a new senator. New senator,
indeed.
So
it's breathtaking. Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Your reaction is appropriate.
To make it criminal.
Right?
It just leaves me speechless.
It does. It's that kind of legislation. Hopefully, it'll get the reception it deserves.
Okay, Scott, we've got to talk about the University of Florida settling a lawsuit with a conservative student group.
Tim, the Young Americans for Freedom will get $66,000 from the Florida taxpayers and tuition payers at the University of Florida because the administrators there engaged in impermissible viewpoint-based discrimination. They don't like conservatives, and so they didn't want to pay to have conservatives come and speak at the campus unlike what they're willing to do for Democrats and progressives. And that's illegal.
Well, this just continues a long trend that we've seen, particularly in California and at Berkeley, of shutting down conservative speech and automatically considering
Tim, I want you to stop right there, because I don't want to give the listeners the wrong impression that this is some kind of isolated Berkeley leftist stuff.
Well, no,
this is Main Street.
I know.
The university down the street from them is likely doing the same thing. And that's what's happened here at the University of Florida. The administrators didn't want to pay to have Dana Loesch and Andrew Klavan be brought to campus, but meanwhile, they will pay for any leftist or progressive who wants to. And it's an illegal discrimination against the First Amendment rights of the students, and they're going to be forced to pay for it. Well, excuse me, Tim, not the administrators who did the wrong thing, but the taxpayers of Florida and the people who pay tuition to go to the University of Florida. They're going to pay.
Well, now you make the point that this is not limited to places like California that get the high profile, the headlines.
Right.
It's happening in smaller states. It's happening in blue states.
Probably the community college down the street. It's endemic.
Blue states, red states, everywhere. So what to do?
Sue and demand your rights be upheld, as the Young Americans Foundation has done here.
As a constitutional lawyer, I'm shocked that you would recommend lawsuits as a course
sadly,
of
that
action.
seems to be the only thing that's likely to bring these people to bear when they actually, it costs them some money in their budget for discrimination. If it's a cost-free enterprise, we've seen time and again these college administrators, Tim, are absolutely willing to smash the rights of conservatives and libertarians, their free speech rights included.
Well, it seems like we're finally getting some attention on this issue. Are we getting any action? Is this administration doing anything for or against the censoring of free speech?
Well, because the Obama administration was perhaps the worst administration in history when it comes to free speech, it's no great praise to say that the current administration is doing a much better job, though they are. But still, there is so much work to be done. To say that this administration has really taken the reins in asserting students' right to free speech, I think gives them a little too much credit. But certainly it's better than the one from before.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, with Mark Angelides. All of them available on demand anytime, anywhere, any place on LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.